this is the People Show. And the reason we call it the People Show is because we do it for the people, of the people, by the people, which is how it should be. But what I wanted to do more than anything, we also have Graham Moore here, who's my co-host. But what I like to do is I like to give people an opportunity to tell me what they're about, as opposed to me making assumptions by anything I may have seen or read. I know that I have shared a few of your articles myself in the past. So if you can tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what you're renowned for.
Sure. I have a long history with Islam in the Middle East, both on a personal and professional level. So let's start personally. My family was born and raised in Egypt, Coptic Christians, who've become more famous actually in the last few years, just like the Assyrians and the other Christian minorities, because they're being persecuted. But so my family's from Egypt, born and raised there. I was born here, raised here, but I grew up sort of with a very intimate knowledge of that region. I also went traveling there in my youth, traveled there very often, not just Egypt, but other Middle Eastern regions and Muslim countries. And so that's just my youth. And I've always had an interest in the history of that era, actually beginning with the ancient Egyptians. That was my ultimate forte in my youth. But as things progressed, the more relevant issue became Islam, of course. And so professionally in college, I majored in this field in history. Got a master's degree, and my thesis was actually about the first pivotal battle, military history, between Islam and Christendom, Battle of Yarmouk in the year 636. My professor at the time, who I'm still friends with, of course, is Victor Davis Hanson, well-known military historian. And so through college, I also developed a deep interest in this field academically, not so much contemporary news still. And then 9/11 happened. And actually, that was the last, semester I was finishing my thesis, which was about that battle. And what caught my eye and my attention when I started listening to the communiques by people like Osama bin Laden and so forth was how, to them, what I was studying, which I thought was just arcane and no one really cared about, the year 636, some military battle, but he was actually talking about it, referencing it, using it as a paradigm. Muslims knew about it. It was in the now for them. And long story short, that made a shift for me from just studying history and academic things regarding Islam, including theology and doctrine, to sort of moving towards modern, contemporary Middle East, Islamism, and so forth. And long story short, what's the word? I'm losing the word here. I applied at Georgetown University Center of Contemporary Arab Studies and was accepted. And I went there for a time, and then I got a job at the Library of Congress in the Middle Eastern Division. I'm giving you the briefest version, but just to give you an idea. And then while I was there, I came across all these Arabic writings by, again, Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, who's the current leader of Al-Qaeda. And what they wrote actually very much contradicted what I had seen in those early communiques that I was referring to after 9/11 by Osama bin Laden. They were basically not talking about grievances, which we're all familiar with, but rather how Islam commands Muslims to wage jihad on the infidel, how Islam commands Muslims to hate the infidel, never make peace with the infidel unless they have to because they're weak and so forth. Anyway, and that eventually became my first book, The Al-Qaeda Reader. I wanted to I translated the writings that I found in the Library of Congress and juxtaposed them with the already translated and widely disseminated speeches of Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri to America and to Europe, blaming them and saying we're attacking you because of political grievances. I wanted to show the contradiction. And so that's really how I got into the field of contemporary Middle Eastern Islamic issues, and I started writing a lot more. And then in more recent years, I've taken an interest going back again to my own personal background of the Muslim persecution of Christians in the Middle East. And I've really delved into that and covered it. I write a report that comes out every month called Muslim Persecution of Christians. And I've actually been doing it this month. I think it's been 5 years. And it's amazing to me because if you look at these reports, all I do is I digest, summarize what happens to Christians at the hands of Muslims every month. And they've just gotten longer and longer every month. I remember originally thinking when I came up with this idea that what happens if a month comes and, there isn't much to report? that never has happened. It's only grown and grown and grown. And of the dozens that I collate in these reports every month, any one of them would be probably mainstream media news if it was a Christian or a non-Muslim doing it to a Muslim. But you don't hear about them. Long story short, I also wrote a book, Crucified Again, exposing Islam's new war on Christians, which essentially is on that topic. And that's what I do now, just research and write on those themes and others.
I've been out to Egypt quite a few times, and something that you might be able to answer for me that I noticed is whenever you would go and perhaps we would wander around the shops, if anybody approached us, the first thing they would do is say, "You can trust me, it's okay, I'm a Christian," and they would show me a small tattoo of a cross on their wrist. Now, I don't know if that was a choice of them as a Christian to have the cross, or is it something imposed on them? Maybe that's something you could answer.
That's actually a good question, and there's various theories. The one that I believe is the oldest and makes most sense is Christians did it themselves. It wasn't imposed on them. Islamic law has only Islam and Islamic law despise the cross. They don't want to see it, so they're not going to impose it on anyone's body. But what they did do is have them wear certain colored belts and hats and so forth to indicate that they're, non-Muslim, dhimmis, Christians, Jews, and so forth. But I believe the Christians started doing it to indicate their own, so that if anyone were to find someone with a cross on their wrist who says he's a Muslim, maybe a woman or a child who's been abducted and forced to convert or compelled to convert, who doesn't even know their own background, it's a reminder of their heritage and who they are.
And possibly, I suppose, if a child was kidnapped, at least you can guarantee it, if anybody finds that child, they're going to identify that the child is Christian.
Yeah.
So it's similar to, whilst the Jews were forced to have stamps put on them, you would know a Jewish person who came from a concentration camp by the verification of the actual tattoo itself. Now, we do see a lot of Christian persecution when you look at the
sorry to cut you off, but just to give you the fullest picture in regards to your question, in recent times, it's more of, a pride thing. I mean, lots of Christians, including now in America and Copts, I'm even finding non-Copts who are actually putting the same Coptic cross essentially on their wrist. So it's almost like an act of defiance now, saying, yes, I'm a Christian.
So there's an element of, it's almost two fingers to Islam by getting that tattoo and making sure that you don't ever lose your identity, I suppose, in that respect. And what I've noticed is that there is a lot of Christian persecution within, for example, the jungle in Calais. I know this for a fact, that there were over 500 ISIS within the camp of Calais, and Christians are on a daily basis being attacked in some of the most abhorrent ways. So if you could give an idea of how could we best help not just Christians, because I believe atheists are also quite badly targeted as well, but how do you fight against something when we've got the left that literally are actually enabling this to happen and continue?
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I always like when, if you want to address a problem, you need to get to the root source. You don't want to get lost in peripherals and distractions. And so one of the things I often say is that if and when, and it was, if Islam was on the offensive, if Islam was attacking, if Islam conquered 2/3 of Christendom in the 7th century, what we call today the Arab world, North Africa, Southwest Asia, even though it was actually the heart of Christendom in the 7th century, 4 of the 5 seas, or the centers of Christendom, are now under Islamic occupation, minus Rome. So the point is, when people look today and they discuss the migrant crisis and so forth, this is not the same, because they are not coming in because they can. Before, they used to come in with the swords, break down, walls, invade, attack, plunder, kill, enslave, rape, and so forth. If Muslims are doing this now, the key thing to remember is it's only because Western elements are letting them do it. They're not breaking in. So if you really want to point the finger, we can say Islam is what Islam is, and that's fine. But the current crisis is not because Islam is doing what it can do. It's doing it because it's being empowered and allowed to by these ruling elites who, for whatever reason, whether they really believe, the Islam is peace mantra, multiculturalism, and so forth, or whether there's some sort of globalist agenda, as we often hear, New World Order. I don't know about that, but I can tell you that all that you're seeing is 100% being enabled by Western elements. Muslims can't do it on their own right now. They're being empowered.
They are. They're being empowered by weak governments. They're being empowered by the bleeding heart left, who think that anybody who says anything against a Muslim or against Islam therefore must hate all Muslims and assume all Muslims are terrorists. So that's something that perhaps I need to ask you as well. Do you think that something that Bill Warner I found quite interesting was he said it's not about how Muslim somebody is, but how Islamic is that Muslim?
Well, sure.
Would you agree with that?
I try to make the distinction. I always try to make the distinction between Islam on the one hand as a black and white ideology, and then Muslims on the other hand, who are, as humans, to varying degrees subscribe to, understand the ideology and so forth. So, sure, there is no Islam is Islam. Islam's been doing what Islam's been doing for 1,400 years. It's amazing to see what's happening, and then have all these people tell us, oh, it's an aberration, oh, it's a product of grievances. Oh, no. I mean, well, what compelled Muslims to go and attack and kill people all across the world in the 7th, 8th, 9th, all the way until the gates of Vienna, siege of Vienna, 1683? Was it because of grievances? No, it was the same thing. You have three choices. You convert and you pay jizya, be a tributary or third-class citizen, essentially, or you die. So it's amazing to me to see all this continuity, and that it perfectly mirrors history, and yet we have 1,000,001 excuses that try somehow to deflect it off of Islam. And again, you see, that's the current state of affairs. It's not that the West is handicapped and paralyzed and doesn't know how to fight back and is being overtaken by might of arms, as it used to be centuries ago. It's these absurd, insane worldviews and outlooks that are allowing, the world to become topsy-turvy.
Political correctness.
Yeah, that's actually a euphemism to me. I call it stupidity and idiocy.
Yes, I call it stupidity. And I also think that we do have political correctness in this country. I don't think America's got it in the same way that the UK has got it. It gets as bad. But you live out there. Would you say out in America, political correctness now, what we see as being political correctness, is as bad in America as it is in other countries?
No, I think Europe, from what I've personally seen, is more progressive than America in that sense, and that's not a compliment. And what I mean by that is they're more progressive. They're more progressive in the sense of the lunacy that we're discussing. So, the political correctness, it's such a veneer also, because there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, will play the game, but if you get them alone for half a second and speak some words of common sense, immediately it's like they're dying to hear it. I think everyone's been conditioned to feel like we're isolated, and what we think is just so weird, so we're sort of taught to keep it to ourselves. But once someone says it, I think, and that right there is the grand appeal of Donald Trump. He's saying what everyone else is thinking, but is too scared to say. And so I think that's his number one appeal. And we're so tired of the boilerplate platitudes coming out of the politicians and that mean nothing or mean the exact opposite of what's happening. But still, I'm kind of a pessimist, and to me, as good as, let's say if America's better than Western Europe and so forth, it's still bad enough, in my opinion, that we're at this point. And I when people talk of the left and the right and the liberal and the conservative, in my mind, I've broken it down to, no offense, but liberals, leftists are just stupid, and conservatives are just smart. And I'm not talking about every policy. I'm just saying in the broad general outlook, anyone who subscribes to these sorts of liberal, multicultural views is ultimately intellectually, compromised. I mean, that's how it is. And the big bad, unenlightened conservative is actually one who's got a lot more common sense and understands how the world works. So that's really the two forces that we have fighting. We're talking about, common sense and intelligence on one hand, and naivety and silliness on the other, and we call them the left and the right, conservative and liberal.
So, especially in the UK, we've seen a massive rise in Muslim grooming gangs. Now, I don't think that's something that as of yet America has really been hit by. What we have seen a lot of is the way in which these girls are groomed and the manner in which they're treated, and on the whole, predominantly white girls. And when these men try to use it, they'll use excuses such as cultural differences. And this is one of the reasons that a guy called Trevor Phillips, who originated the word Islamophobia, he was the guy who, we must have this word Islamophobia in the definition of the dictionary. And what that ended up doing was our police force are not addressing the issue. We've just had another big grooming gang that's been opened up in Telford. We've obviously had Rotherham, that everybody knows about Rotherham. They don't know about the other 40 towns across the UK that have been hit by these grooming gangs. And the minute you say Muslim grooming gangs, of course, the left come at you, well, white men rape too. The difference is nobody denies that white men rapes. Nobody denies that Catholic priests were raping little boys. But the minute you say Muslim, in come the left with this, you can't tar all Muslims. And they don't understand, well, we're not tarring all Muslims. We're just saying there is a problem. And until that problem is actually spoken about and addressed, how else can we deal with it? And we're not unlike America. We don't have the ability to walk around with a gun to protect ourselves or our children. Would you say that this is something that is inherent within the doctrine of Islam? This targeting of people?
Right. This grooming thing, it's a modern day manifestation of something that is integral to Islam, and not just the enslavement and rape, but specifically the enslavement and rape of white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed women. This actually goes all the way back to Muhammad. Yeah. And early Islamic sources in Arabic indicate that he used to try to incite or inspire or entice his followers to go and wage war on the Romans, or basically the Byzantines. We call them the Byzantines today. And he would tell the men, don't you want to enslave and have what he referred to them as the people of yellow, which essentially was an indication of their pale hair color. And after that, that's just Muhammad. But then after that, in all the early Islamic writings, the number one source to go on slave raids and get concubines and so forth was Europe. The Byzantine Empire, because it was the neighboring border of the Caliphate, Anatolia, Constantinople, but also across the Mediterranean and Europe proper. And you have countless of accounts that indicate that is why we want to go, up until as recent as I think in the 1600s in Iceland, distant Iceland, as far as you can get away from the Islamic world. The people there there's prayers to God to save them from the terror of the Turk, essentially the Corsair Muslim pirates from North Africa, who used to go specifically to get women and children and sell them in the slave markets of Algiers. So this has a long history. It's completely exonerated by the Prophet himself. The Quran itself talks about enslaving the infidel women. They're called that which your right hand possesses. And even in the Arabic Quran, it doesn't say who your right hand possesses. It actually uses that's or what's, the pronoun, the Arabic pronoun, which most people don't even pay attention to. And it helps understand why sex slaves, Yazidis, and so forth are treated essentially as subhuman, just chattel to be used and killed and discarded and so forth. And that, like I said, is a 1,400-year history. And so when you come and fast forward and we go back to the whole Western elites and so forth, allowing Muslims to come in, and then they're doing the same exact thing. You have right now on records, when you read some of these reports of a woman in Britain being raped, or in Germany or wherever, and you'll have the Muslim man saying things that essentially echo what the early caliphs and Muhammad were saying about how the white woman is better at sex, how the white woman and the Christian woman exist solely for the Muslim man's sex and so forth. So yeah, it's such a well packaged story for centuries, and yet you fast forward, and why I'm telling you this is stupidity. This isn't even being on the left or the right. This is just stupidity, and we can't even just understand and connect the dots in the continuity and just see what's happening.
I think that the UK is starting to connect the dots. The trouble is we do have, and I don't like the whole term left and right, because I don't see myself as being left or right. I see myself as being centre middle. Politically I'm centre middle. but whenever, because I've got an organisation called Maria's, which I give a lot of support to women who have been groomed and trafficked and raped. And some of the things that have been done to these girls, you're absolutely right. It not only is it abhorrent, but I mean, even down to as much as branding them with the letter N. You know, it's pretty sick what has been done to these women. But equally, would you say, in your opinion, that Muslim women are also a victim of Islam itself?
The greatest, okay, so there's two categories, you know. The female gender is the greatest victim of Islam, okay? And, of course, the non-Muslim female is the absolute greatest. But the Muslim woman, of course, is also a victim of Islam. If you want to put on the prism of 21st century modern West and how women should be treated, that is completely contradicted by Islamic teachings. A woman is the Quran describes her as being under the authority of men who can beat them, to put them in their place, including for sex. Muhammad himself told women that they are much stupider than men. That's why we need a lot more 2 witnesses for every 1 man of a woman. He said that hell is the vast majority of its denizens were women. So Islam doesn't have a very favorable picture of women. And by the way, related to all this, the reason that a woman wears the hijab, a Muslim woman, is because she's pointing out, I am not one of those infidels who you freely have. I'm a protected woman. And so that's why a lot of Muslim men, when they come to Europe and they see all this naked flesh, they just, okay, this is just for one thing. Because to them, a woman that's not to be molested openly has to be completely covered head to toe. That's her way of saying, I'm not for that. So when they see, in fact, the slave girls I was referring to historically were banned from covering themselves. They, according to Islamic teachings, they had to be topless all the way to their belly button to indicate their status as just essentially concubines.
So how do you explain, for example, one of the things that I went so long to see when I was in Egypt, I went along to a place called Fantasia, and obviously you had dancing girls who were basically belly dancers. They came out scantily clad, bikini top, and all of the husbands at the front with their phones filming it, all the wives sat at the back fully burqa'd. And it kind of, I didn't know at the time whether these women were Christian women or whether these women were Muslim women. Would you say that they were probably Christian women, or do you think that Muslim women can also be treated as if they're... Because something that was quite interesting, one of the apostates that I give support to said to me that his family are quite extreme. And one of the things that he was telling me, so maybe you could shed some light on this, is if a Muslim woman is born and as she grows, she develops a large bust, it's a punishment because it's because she's a whore and that's why she's got a big bust and therefore not marriage material at all. Is this something you're familiar with?
No, I'm not familiar with that, but, you know, that a Muslim would say something like that doesn't surprise me either, but I don't know if I can trace it to a specific Islamic teaching. As far as, you know, the belly dance and so forth, you have to keep in mind, and this is, I think, so many people have a problem with this, and this is what confuses them when it comes to Islam, is they go to a country like Egypt or they go to a Muslim household, and they find very infidel things going on. And then they start thinking, well, how can you say Islam is this? And, well, again, Islam is Islam, but that doesn't mean you can go to Egypt, you can go to Saudi Arabia, and if it's behind closed doors, you're going to be seeing people drinking alcohol and doing all sorts of things. Because when it's all said and done, living according to Islam's ideals is not easy for a Muslim. And so there's a lot of, slippage and so forth that happens, but what is easy is that part of the doctrine that allows you to go plunder, enslave, and kill someone else just because they're different than you, in this case, because they don't embrace your God and your prophet. That's sort of easy. And that's why, for instance, you'll find a lot of people complain, oh, well, these guys weren't real jihadis because they were watching porn. They were drinking alcohol. So how can you say they're Islamic? Well, one, they're forgetting that in Islam, it's well known that the only person who can sin all they want, and it doesn't matter, all their sins are forgiven, is the martyr or the jihadist who goes and kills himself to empower Islam. He can do whatever he wants. And the second thing is I don't see anything so shocking or surprising if there are, in fact, less than pious Muslims, even in the Islamic State, who are fighting for them, and maybe they don't even believe in all this, but they're in a group and in an ideology that allows them, that exonerates them to go and kill and rape and plunder and do this and do that. So you don't have to always connect piety with the severity of Islam when it comes, especially to what it allows a nominal believer to do to the non-believer.
Okay, Graham, have you got anything? Because I can see he's itching there. He's paying attention, so it'd be good to get Graham to also.
Yeah, Raymond, there's a number of things that you've said that I want to pick up on, and it's one thing that I want to drop back on that you haven't mentioned. The first thing is very interesting that you have got, if you like, an Egyptian background. There was a guy on a radio station in this country, a Muslim guy, that rang in and was crying down the phone to the presenter, and I was listening to this. They wouldn't let me. I couldn't get through to say what I wanted to say. It was a very emotional call, and this Muslim guy said, "I can't believe what these people are doing with my religion, and when we talk about Christianity, Muhammad." In Egypt, there was a church, and he pinned a letter to the door of the church, and that letter explained to everyone that, you know, we was to accept all religions, etc. All right. So the first thing is, can you enlighten us on that letter? The second is, my response to that was going to be, what that guy is talking about is the first part of what Muhammad was when he was in Mecca. And everything else kicked in when he went into Medina. Then you got the Sirahs and the Hadiths, yeah? But if you just took that fraction of when he wrote the Quran in Mecca, that is what I believe that particular Muslim was expressing. Now, that is my view. I don't know. What would you say to that?
Right. There's a lot of truth to what you're saying. First, there's these very sporadic accounts of Muhammad that come off somewhat favorable and tolerant towards Christians, including in the caliphs and so forth. And, you know, whatever the veracity of it may be, the fact is they're counterbalanced by all these other accounts that are violent and intolerant. And as you're saying, you know, you're referring to the dichotomy of the Quran, the Mecca versus Medina. Basically, when Muhammad was weak and outnumbered, and he had a handful of followers, he was in Mecca with a pagan Quraysh tribe. He preached peace, and he didn't threaten anyone except with hellfire. When he went to Medina, he became essentially a tribal war chief. He went on a plunder and started killing and so forth. That's when you get all the violent verses that allow Muslims to go and kill and slay and plunder non-Muslim. And so, really, how Islamic doctrine has seen it is in two ways. One is, as you probably know, the doctrine of abrogation. It says, yes, Muhammad said this or that, or the revelation was revealed to Muhammad. Mecca, you know, it said whatever tolerant thing. For example, there is no coercion in religion. You always hear that verse. Quran. I have your religion, I have mine. That is in the Quran, but that's from the Meccan, the early phase. Exactly. So those are supposed to be abrogated by the Medina phase, which is Quran, 9:5, the sword verse, basically kill and wait to ambush the non-Muslim anytime, or 9:29, which specifically indicates the people of the book, Christians, Jews, to give them the three choices that we're referring to: convert, or live with tributary pages, or die. And that's how it's been. And the other view is basically, and this is actually what I see happening right now. I remember a conversation I had. It was very memorable for me back in the Library of Congress when I worked there. And it was with a Somali Muslim who, we had very cordial relations, and we would often talk about religion. We had religious debates, and he kept telling me all these. I was telling him, well, what about this Quranic verse that's violent and so forth? And he's like, well, there's no, compulsion of this. And I told him what I'm saying right now, which is, well, that's the Mecca verses. That's been abrogated. And he looked at me and goes, well, not for me. I'm in Mecca. And I came to understand what he means is he's in America, he's outnumbered, he's not in a position to go on the warpath. Yeah. So it's for him to start talking about Islam's peace and mercy and getting on.
Well, just there's two other elements that I want to come back to on this. One of the things that I see, and I'm going to use it in inverted commas, as an excuse, is the translation from Arabic into these, different languages. And seeing as that you have studied Arabic, the bit that smacks me in the face, if you like, is if this is a mistranslation throughout the world, why is it that every element of Islam, wherever they are, whether it's North Africa, whether it's Africa, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Saudi, wherever it is, they all seem to have the same type of violence, whether it be beheading, rapes, cutting people's arms off, all of the things that is central to Islam.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
surely...
The Quran, look, the idea that, you often hear this. This is another one of the apologetics. Arabic, especially Quranic Arabic, is so untranslatable. You can't really understand it. That's nonsense. When it comes to, deriving what the Quran is saying, you can translate it, and it's been done. So there's no mystery to that. And as you indicated, I recently wrote an article saying, forget doctrine, look at history. And I made the same point that you're saying, which is we don't even have to get into what the Quran says. We don't have to talk about the hadith and the surahs and the tafsirs and all that, Islamic jurisprudence stuff. Just look at the identical patterns of violence and persecution and discrimination against non-Muslims that have exhibited themselves from day one all the way until now in nations that have nothing to do with each other, that are black nations in Africa, Sinic East Asian countries, Indonesia, Philippines, Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and then of course the Arab nations and so forth. These people have nothing to do with each other. They live in different circumstances, but a lot of them are named Muhammad, and Islam is practiced there. And you're going to find what you alluded to: the destruction of churches, the ban on churches, the enslavement, discrimination, rape of non-Muslims, attacks on those who are perceived to blaspheme Islam, attacks on those who want to leave Islam and become Christians or atheists, apostates, and so forth. So we don't really even need to look at the doctrine. How does one account, as you say, for all of these identical patterns and otherwise diverse nations that have nothing to do with each other except Islam?
Yeah, no. Well, I agree. And to me, to any logical person, they would say the common denominator is Islam, and that means the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. That's the totality of Islam, and that's what they're doing is what it teaches. Full stop. And that's part of the problem. But I just want to take you back to two, and you just touched on it, which is the history. From my understanding, there was well in excess of 500 battles in history to conquer Christendom and the Jews. And there were only somewhere in the region of 18 definable battles of the Crusades, or roughly 18. I'm not an expert in that subject. And the Crusades only started 400 years later, after the birth of Islam. And the reason why they started was finally a pope said, we need to rescue the Christians and we need to make it stop. What was interesting, first of all, I want to sort of advance on that slightly if you can, because I haven't got the knowledge on that, and I'm sure you have. And the second element is we've just had a future pope that comes from Austria, Vienna, and he has stated this is a war on Christianity and this is a war on us and the West, and we need to basically stop it. And he has been vilified by the press by saying that because he could be the future pope. But one of the arguments that I heard from someone on a radio show was this lady rang in and said, you've also got to remember is that Austria and European elements of Europe, yeah, it's more in their recent history that they have been invaded and conquered by Islam and Austria. So they are going to have a more graphic element to that. They're going to understand it more. Whereas Britain hasn't been conquered or invaded for 1,000 years.
And that's why Hungary is also, Viktor Orban,
Yep.
if I'm pronouncing his name correct, is, very vociferously anti-Islam. And that's because Hungary, not too long ago, was under the Ottoman yoke and was experiencing all the things that we're talking about, more than Austria, because they were actually conquered for, I think, 1.5 centuries or so. But, yeah, this goes back to this whole, again, it's this whole, I don't even want to say misunderstanding of history, because it's not that there's ignorance. It's rather we're being fed the exact opposite of the truth. And so, as you say, any educated person in America is going to tell you, like if they've gone to college and watched, the History Channel or some documentary, they're going to tell you all the hostility starts with the Crusades. When those imperialistic white European Christians decided to go to those peaceful Muslims and take their land and kill them. And but no word about the previous 400+ years where Muslims took 2/3. This is a very important point. If you took Christendom and in the year 600 and let's say 35, okay, and like I said, most people don't realize this because of history. North Africa was more Christian than Europe at that point. Middle East was more Christian. The centers of Christianity were Alexandria, Egypt, Antioch, Syria, Jerusalem, and then Constantinople, and Rome, of course. Rome is the Western manifestation. And those four were actually taken by bloodshed, forced violence, and forced conversions, and the long story of Islam. And that's how they became Islamic. And then 400 years later, as you're saying, as Islam got closer after the Battle of Manzikert, 1071, 1095, actually before that, the Pope, before Urban, wanted to get a crusade launched because they're here. They're now again on the borders. They've taken and they're destroying Jerusalem again and pillaging, the Holy Third, and so forth. So that context is completely missing of what Islam was doing. It just starts right there with the, and so when you look at how warped that kind of approach to history is and how it's peddled by people like Karen Armstrong and all these other popular historians that show up and talk and everyone buys into it, you start seeing how we are where we are, because everyone, Europeans, white people, Christians, are convinced they started all the violence. So now we can't blame them for being angry. And let's change course and show them and be nice and invite them over and turn the other cheek. And yet all that's happening is now you're, like we said earlier, you're just dropping down the gates and letting what used to happen, which is invasions and attacks and killing and so forth, happen again. Now the only difference is you're helping.
Yeah.
There is a couple of things that Graham was mentioning about with regards to the Pope, the future Pope that came out and said what he said. But by the same token, you then see there was a leading rabbi, a leading Catholic priest, and a leading imam. And the imam turned around and said, I feel more at home, more Islamic in London than I would. Well, of course you do. Of course you do. Because unfortunately, London, to a degree, I suppose you could say London has fallen to a degree. A lot of the indigenous that were born and bred there, whether they be black, white or brown, is irrelevant, have been driven out of London. But what Graham, something that I highlighted to Graham that he wasn't aware of, and he's done a little bit of research himself, is the word sukuk. And what sukuk is, we've had 5 buildings in London, large buildings that have been bought using Sharia bonds. Perhaps can you give the people who are, because there are a lot of people watching live on Facebook right now, so a lot of people won't understand, 1, what is sukuk, and 2, what would be what makes that a very dangerous thing? Now, I understand why it's a dangerous thing, but perhaps you could give your opinion on it.
Before I get into that, I just want to comment something else you said. The comment of I feel more Islamic, or the realm of London. There's another aspect to that most people don't understand what he's saying. You'd be surprised at how, so in the West, in London and so forth, mosques, you don't want to monitor them because that's considered racist, Islamophobic, and so forth. In Egypt, in Muslim countries, the governments they crack down more on Muslims. In Egypt, there's places where you're banned from wearing the hijab, for instance, and the niqab for security purposes. terrorists. In Egypt, they have bans on certain sermons. You can't just go up if you're a Muslim and start, giving any kind of sermon. The Muslim Brotherhood is banned in Egypt, but it took refuge in the UK. So this is, I think, one of the reasons that a lot of the Islamist types actually like to go to Europe and the West, because they actually get more Islamic freedom than they do in Islamic countries. And the reason for that
is exactly what you said.
Yeah, the reason for that is because Muslims know Muslims, and so the more secular Muslim knows what the more pious one is up to, which is basically denouncing the secular being an apostate and preparing a terrorist attack. And so, all religion aside, they do what they got to do.
Do you think that the reason that the rabbi and the leading Catholic priest are supporting this is because they don't understand what it is they're supporting? Or do you think they do understand? And that this is almost like a... See, I kind of think this is... I'm an atheist myself. I was never christened and I choose to have no religion. But I would never take away somebody's right to their faith. But I will also defend the right of my country as a Christian country, because it's where my values and my culture come from. Even though we're told regularly we don't have a culture, we do. But do you think that they don't understand, or do you think they do understand and that there is some bigger thing going on there? Or
when it comes to this question of, why do Western leaders, politicians, media, journalists, priests, pastors, whatever, defend Islam and say what they say, which is Islam is a religion of peace, it's, terrorists have hijacked it. It boils down to two things. They're either ignorant or they're intentionally lying. And that's it. Now, a lot of people will argue with me, because I make this point often. They say, well, it could be that they're just traitors to their countries, or it could be that they were sold out. Well, yeah, but that means they're still lying. That's why they're saying what they're saying. So whatever their motivation, that's different. But all these people, facts are facts. We've already discussed a little bit of the history and doctrine and current affairs and seen the continuity that stretches over centuries and continents. So you really have to be ignorant or a little, intellectually compromised, not be able to get that and still keep talking about how, Islam's really a religion of peace. Or you are, for whatever agenda you have, spreading the false narrative intentionally. And I think you have a little bit of both and a combination, a little, in each person, there's a little bit of both, maybe. But of course, I also think that the higher ups are liars. They can't be that ignorant and that stupid, especially those people in the churches that you were referring to. Pope Francis, for all his, it's just amazing when you look at his predecessors were they were the chief opponents of Islam historically. Does he not know this? Does he not know that Rome and the Vatican was sacked by Arab raiders in 846, and that a wall still exists because it was erected by a former pope to prevent Saracens from invading over 1,000 years ago, essentially? So I don't know. Is he lying? Is he that naive? But it comes down. But here's the thing: whether these people are lying or whether they're just ignorant and stupid, you're going to have the same damage. And when it's all said and done, it's the same damage, and that's what we're all going to be facing and are facing.
Well, can I just...
Well, I believe it... Sorry, Greg. I believe it could be partly to do with finances. I think there's a lot of money involved. We do have... It's an awful lot of money. And a lot of people... I see on the live feed now, people are going on about oil. People don't understand it. I'm not saying oil doesn't play a part in it. But actually, a lot of it's to do with the money being exchanged, money exchanging hands across the table, so to speak. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of mentality. I do think that
I always hear this oil thing. I'm sorry, but the oil thing, I agree, of course. I mean, the economics and finances, and that, by the way, doesn't really contradict what I'm saying, which is, well, maybe that's why they're doing it, but they still are lying. They know that they're lying. The reason is oil. The reason is economics. Fine, I get that. But, again, this idea of oil... Do you know that Saudi Arabia, for instance, spends about $100 billion a year to spread radical Islamic ideology all throughout the world? Okay, I mean, I see a win-win situation here. Why doesn't the entire free world just invade Saudi Arabia, take their oil wells? Now they don't have money to spend radicalizing Muslims, and you can take that money and spend it on the poor of the world if you want. I don't care, but at least you take it away from them. And best of all, you push them back in the desert where they can truly live according to the sunnah of Muhammad in the desert and chop each other's hands and heads off and so forth without actually being in these having all this money and wealth, which their prophet didn't have. So I think it's a win-win for all.
Do you mind if I
See, I'm sorry, Graham. I will let you. I kind of agree with you in that respect. That I actually think that if our government, instead of just, they did take us into an illegal war. They shouldn't have done that. I think if you're a politician and you're the prime minister of this country and you want to go in and invade Saudi Arabia and take the bloody oil, well, then be honest with the people, because the chances are the people are going to back you.
You have a better, instead of saying Bashar Assad is an evil man when ISIS is a lot worse, and that's the freedom fighters. The Saudis their leadership is corrupt and evil, and they are the head of the snake, of the Islamic snake. They really are. Like I said, they spent $100 billion to radicalize, and so they're very instrumental. 9/11, that happened. What was it? 15 out of the 19 were Saudis. So we actually have good cause to invade, and at least and just take the oil wells, so they can't use that money to continue funding and radicalizing the entire world with jihad. And so my point is, the oil isn't ultimately that much of an issue because it can be taken. But of course, that doesn't fit the current paradigm. We can't talk about invasion and so forth unless it's a Bashar Assad or a Saddam Hussein or someone like that. But when it comes to the Saudis, and they're our friends and allies. Even though they have on record, as you probably know, the Saudis, their fatwas or Islamic decrees are government sanctioned because the government and the religion are combined. Because that's how Islam is. The state and religion are one and the same. So they have a website where it has a fatwa from their highest Islamic cleric saying all Muslims must always have hatred for non-Muslims. And you can't even be their friends unless you have to because you're under their power or authority. But you always have to hate their guts. And then these are the people that our leaders go and hug and kiss and bow in front of.
Yes, that is our Prince, unfortunately. Prince Charles did that, which was to the people of England and the United Kingdom, was something that they found wholly offensive, apart from if you're a slightly liberal person, and then you went, oh, isn't that beautiful and wonderful? Well, actually, it wasn't beautiful and wonderful at all. And people should have been very afraid. And as I said, we've had 5 major buildings in London itself that have been bought using Sukuk, Sharia bonds. So if I can get you to give it a sort of a slight explanation for people who don't know what it is and don't understand what it means, when you've got so many of your government buildings, including our Department for Work and Pensions, which is Richmond House, and our government of Westminster's got to be refurbished, and they're moving over to Richmond House. Richmond House has been bought using Sharia bonds. And when those were signed, at the bottom it said something along the lines of praise be to Allah. And they've already said no alcohol. And when it came out in the newspaper, a lot of people was like, oh yeah, the MPs won't be able to get drunk now. And I thought, you're missing something here, because right underneath it was the line that said, we'll be under Islamic law. So that's slightly worrying when you think that our government are going to be, when they're in that building, they're under Islamic law. So therefore, surely the people of this country will end up under Islamic law.
Okay, and related to this, okay, any money that comes from an Islamic country. So, for instance, just to go back to Saudi Arabia, and it's very wealthy. I look at a university like Georgetown University and Harvard, Hillary Clinton. Okay, all these people get millions from the Saudis, who I just got done saying they have it formally on record that they have to hate non-Muslims. Okay, so why are the Saudis giving millions of dollars to secular universities in America or to politicians in America? It's very obvious why, because they're buying something. They're getting something out of it. And essentially it's the empowerment of Islam, the empowerment of their nation, giving Muslims freedom, cover, mosques, and so forth. So, of course, any money that is coming from these nations, do you know that zakat, the money that Muslims are supposed to pay, which is often translated as charity. Okay, so we often hear one of the 5 pillars is to pay zakat, which they say is money of charity. Well, yeah, it is charity, but do you know that Islamic law forbids you from giving this charity to non-Muslims? So zakat must always go to fellow Muslims, or it can be used in a way to go to someone else, but it helps Islam in a certain fashion. And so even in that, in the giving of money, you see it's once again tied up to the empowerment of Islam or Muslims.
So that hopefully that sort of, because I want to try to get across, especially to people in this country, how much of a serious problem that is. The fact that so many of our buildings, I mean, for example, the Shard is owned by Saudi. You know, we can't just sort of pretend that these things aren't happening. Now, how would you advise getting somebody who is, for want of a better description, left-leaning, liberal apologist, who basically carries white guilt, white shame because of our past? I do that because I know that this is such a crock. Honestly, it annoys me so much, because if they bothered to look at their history for themselves and not just buy into what the education system is telling them, but look a little further and do a little digging. And I'm not an educated woman by any stretch of the imagination. How do we get people like that to actually start opening their eyes up? And I try to do it without being abusive towards people, because I don't think being abusive resolves anything.
Well, and you know, you've gotten down to the most important question now, which is, you know, how is it, I often wonder, that something that's so plain, black and white, so obvious historically, current affairs, and yet no one understands, it's so hard to fathom. And so you come to find out it's not because there's not enough evidence out there, or there isn't enough rational argumentation out there. Those people that you're referring to are suffering from a philosophical malady. Okay, a warped worldview that has been inculcated from all these different media forces of schools and the media and Hollywood and radio, everything that you can imagine has put what you're referring to, white guilt and so forth, in their mind, that it has become the overarching theme, so that when you present to them rational argumentation, as we are doing right now, it doesn't matter. And so this is really the problem. It's not that we can't prove our argument, or we don't have enough of a voice to get around. You're actually now dealing with a group of people that are so indoctrinated that they can't be reasoned with, and you can't get the truth across to them. Now, I'm not talking about everyone, of course. I mean, there's a lot of us who get it, and some who will get it, and so forth. But there's always going to be that group. And we go back to my issue of left and right, liberal and conservative, stupid and smart. Okay, and so this is what it comes down to. And I don't know, because this is now not an issue, once again, of Islam. It's not about Islam. Now it's about us. It's about the West and how it understands the world and what kind of paradigms it uses to make sense of things. And that's really what needs to be addressed, because if you can fix that, then we're done. Because Islam goes back whence it came very easily. Because as I pointed out, Islam is not strong. It's only being empowered left and right by this worldview, by this paradigm.
Go ahead, Graham.
Thank you so much. It's hard to get a word in edgeways when you've got a woman on the show. Only joking. Only joking. Well, first of all, you've already just covered one of my points, which was ignorance. Ignorance is a big player in this, and the problem with ignorance is you have to be educated, and it's the media that are educating people in the other way. When they must know that there is something seriously wrong. That's the first thing. Going back to the oil situation, again, I've written this down quite some time ago, but you've already covered it now. But on the Saudi oil, there's only one slight bit I want to see if I can correct, is that Saudi Arabia are now on the verge of bankruptcy. They have a deficit, and they haven't got enough money, and the oil is running out. So, but in my view, over the last 100 years and our dependency on oil, we have allowed them to propagate that cash and to cause this problem, and that is our ignorant politicians that have allowed it to happen in a certain way. But I also just wanted to say one further thing. This is to the person that wrote in with a question. The Syrian war is not over oil. It is particularly over the European Union's, and I explicitly say them because it's not Great Britain or England. It is their energy crisis that has caused this problem, and Putin, quite rightly, was defrauded or whatever. Someone was nicking the gas in Ukraine. He switched the gas off in 2008/2009 to the whole of the Eastern European countries, including Germany and Turkey. When he did that, that's when they wanted regime change in Syria, because Assad said, you're not putting a gas pipe from Qatar through Iraq, through Syria, Turkey, blah, 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 and we're not doing it. Syria said no. Assad said no. That is the cause of the Syrian war, the energy crisis in Europe. And that is not being spoken about. I've discussed this on the radio, and I've even spoke to Tim Marshall from Sky. That was but it's not all, and he starts stuttering. He knows that that's a massive element of this. So that is a target area for that. But again, a lot of this comes down to not just ignorance, but incompetence of the people, and it's one of the reasons why I say we need a whole new set and breed of politicians.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And, in regards to the Syrian war, the thesis that you posited, which I've heard often, is certainly plausible. I don't have a problem with that. What I do know is it's not about what we are saying it's for. What is the West saying the war is for? It's because we want to get rid of this big bad dictator, which is a joke. Because if that was the case, there's a lot of worse tyrants out there who are really abusing people, like our good friend Saudi Arabia, for instance. If this was an altruistic war about bringing freedom and democracy, not a secular, Western-educated Bashar Assad, or even Saddam Hussein, if you go back to that. So there's, of course, always a underlying reason that no one's thought that the media government will actually admit to, that's behind the war, and it's not what they're saying.
Just as a caveat to that, the people listening may not be aware that Assad actually worked in this country, in England, for 12 years as an eye surgeon in Moorfields Hospital. He was a top eye surgeon. His wife is English. It was his sweetheart in university, and he married her and took her back to Syria, and they started to educate people. They started getting engineers up and running. All of the programs that you would expect in a modern society, Assad and his wife started. So people have got to understand, he is not the tyrant that people are saying he is.
Yeah, but we're back full circle to the big lies that are out there in the media and that people buy and believe in, and shapes their worldview, and then everything goes downhill from there.
Yeah, I agree.
I've noticed that I'm seeing a lot of, because I'm watching the live feed as I'm speaking to you, and what I see a lot, and we see this on a daily basis, is we see kill them all, we see send them all back. Now, what I can never understand. See, it doesn't matter left or right. Stupid is as stupid does. Right. First of all, I would not want to go out and take a weapon and kill a child, no matter whose child it was. Just who I am. Secondly, we can't just send them back. Some of them are born here and only have a passport for this country. So where would they like us to send them to? So I think what you're saying is that you need to educate people that it is not a religion of peace. And the more people that start to realise it, the sooner you can start. And once you start exposing it, and more people expose it, and more people expose it, sooner or later, it's like letting the cat out the bag. Suddenly this big secret, it's no longer a secret anymore, and therein lies the power, because actually they kind of scuttle backward and they go, well, actually we can't pull the wool over their eyes anymore. Would you agree that would be the right or the wrong way? Because I don't believe in don't get me wrong, I think civil war's coming whether we like it or not. It's going to come.
Well, the whole idea of educating, spreading more knowledge and awareness is essentially all that can be done at this point. And, I'm in that field. That's all I do. That's my job, is to talk, write, disseminate about this topic. So by all means, I'm for that. And I think there's been progress, again, with Brexit, am I pronouncing that right? Brexit.
Yeah.
Brexit, the Trump phenomena, Hungary and all that, which in the media is, of course, all evil and bad, but it's a reflection of how a great amount of people are getting it and supporting it, whereas before, think about what Donald Trump says. That cannot be said by any politician a few years ago. at all. It was impossible. And now that he's saying it and really changed the whole game up, more people are saying it, more are coming out. So yeah, there's by all means we should continue the intelligent or the intellectual spreading information type thing, and I'm not against that. As far as I mean, you were talking about people saying killing them. Yeah, I see comments like that all the time. Let's kill them all. Let's do that. And yeah, I'm not for that either. But I do believe you need to again separate Islam from the Muslim until you actually know what's going on. Okay, but Islam itself, I have no problem if it's banned because it's a hostile ideology. It's an ideology that openly proclaims supremacy over everyone, its subjugation of women and non-Muslims and so forth. So why would you allow that into your nation knowingly? And that's where we are, because we have a bunch of liars or idiots or whatever saying it's not that when we all know it is. And again, we come right back.
We do have a problem here, though. I mean, in the UK, we have in England, I believe it's just England. We have I believe it's now in the region of 117 mosques. Now, United Kingdom is very, very small and would fit in a very small corner of Texas. And that's a massive amount of mosques to have in this country. And I believe that mosques personally are nothing more than base camp. And there are a lot of Muslim women. What I've noticed with Muslim women is who have suffered because of Sharia. They won't go to the mosque and they won't go to the imam. They won't have anything to do with it. Within the walls of many mosques, extremism, violence, I wouldn't be surprised if there's guns in there, weapons.
Oh, they're always finding weapons and guns, especially in Middle Eastern, Egypt, mosques. Mosques are basically the indoctrination centers where Muslims get radicalized, as we use that word. That's it. It's not a place where people go and worship God and pray for health for the world and goodwill. No, it's where for example, Muslims, the one day of the week that they meet, sort of their equivalent to Christian Sunday is Friday. They meet in mosques and hear sermons. If you look in the Islamic world and where Christians and other minorities live, invariably attacks on them occur on Friday. And people don't connect the dots, but I know why it happens, because the Muslims went to a mosque, got riled up at a sermon about how dare those uppity infidels want, they want equality and rights, and how dare they look, they might be building a church. Muslims go out and punish them. And so that, again, gives you an idea of what's going on inside mosques. But
which I've been saying as well.
Cut it off now, unfortunately.
That's okay. It's been lovely having you on, and I hope that a lot of people have gained something from listening to you, and hopefully they'll all give you a follow on Twitter and Facebook, because I know you've got it, including myself. I will be stalking your Twitter line from now on. But thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate you coming on and giving us the benefit of your knowledge.
It was my pleasure. Anytime.
We look forward to having you on again.
Okay. Take care.
You take care of yourself.